Hi, welcome to Gideon Taylor's PeopleSoft Master Series webinar. Today's topic is creating custom compliance solutions for PeopleSoft, automating Minnesota's wage theft statement. In addition to today's webinar, we also have others that we're hosting in January and February. The two that we're hosting in January focus on PeopleSoft's onboarding capabilities, with the one on the 30th being a co-presentation with our partner Appsian and focusing on onboarding and single sign-on. In February, we have one coming up on effectively scoping custom electronic forms projects, so we hope you're able to join us. At the close of today's webinar, you'll receive an email with a link to download the PowerPoint as well as access the webinar recording, and you'll also have the opportunity to register for any of these upcoming webinars. Gideon Taylor has been focused on PeopleSoft solutions for over 18 years. We got our start as a PeopleSoft consultancy, helping organizations implement, upgrade, and optimize their PeopleSoft systems. And we've really evolved over the last 16 years to focus on helping organizations revolutionize business processes, enabling them to introduce powerful, intelligent, custom automation that PeopleSoft either doesn't deliver out of the box or doesn't deliver the way that they would want it to be delivered. And our vision is to help our clients work simply, effectively, efficiently, and flexibly. There are three logos on this slide that I'll point out. One is our status as an Oracle Gold partner. We've been a Gold partner for many years. And the other two smaller ones focus on Oracle validated integration for our GTD Forms product. It is a powerful, intelligent, dynamic tool to allow for you to create your own custom workflow-enabled fluid applications. This is what we lovingly refer to as our NASCAR slide. It just gives you some perspective in terms of the types of organizations that we've worked with over the years. We have done a lot of work in higher education, but also a lot in public sector as well as commercial. In addition to providing powerful tools like GTD Forms that allows for organizations to build their own custom PeopleSoft-based solutions, we also provide a full array of services to help them with those solutions and help them drive more value out of your PeopleSoft systems. Our agenda today, we have a lot to cover, and there are a few people that I'd like to introduce off the bat. Again, my name is Scott Anton with Gideon Taylor. On the line with us as well today is Lynette Shadone. Lynette is a solution architect and senior business analyst with Gideon Taylor, and also Teresa Swanson, payroll and IT manager for Hennepin County. We're going to be walking through a few examples of other custom compliance solutions just to give you some additional perspective, and then we're going to focus on the Minnesota wage theft law and the resulting wage theft statement eForm that we derived to meet the requirements of Minnesota's new law. At the end, we'll do wrap-up and Q&A, but certainly during the course of the presentation today, as you have questions, feel free to pose those online. We're happy to take a pause and address those as we go along. If you were to just remember one slide from today's presentation, this gives a fantastic summary of some of the key points and features of GTD Forms. I already mentioned that it is Oracle validated, so it's got a great stamp of approval from Oracle. It is the only tools, it's the only forms tool that is specifically certified for PeopleSoft by Oracle. It is built 100% with PeopleTools. It is predominantly a configuration-based tool for both form creation as well as form management, allowing business analysts to create these powerful, intelligent, workflow-enabled solutions and then also maintain them going forward. That provides native real-time access to PeopleSoft data, including employee data, student data, and financial data. You're leveraging your existing PeopleSoft workflow, security, and infrastructure because it is all built into PeopleSoft, built with PeopleTools. And you have unlimited flexibility in how these forms look, how they behave, how they route, and what happens to the data once they're done. And then finally, they're mobile. Every form that you create has the ability to automatically be rendered as a fluid application without fluid development. So that's extremely powerful, making GTD Forms very flexible and dynamic for your users. Kicking off with a couple of examples of other compliance solutions that are GTD Forms based within PeopleSoft. The first one being our Paperless I9 with EVerify integration. I wanted to bring this up because it shows an example of an online form in PeopleSoft that looks very much like a paper form. And we designed that intentionally to look like the paper form that our Paperless I9 replaces. A user can go ahead and enter the information for their employment eligibility verification, A manager or HR representative can come in and work with them to validate their identity documentation and then submit that information to EVerify for instantaneous employment eligibility verification. Because of the integration that the I9 eVerify solution shares inside PeopleSoft, that is something that can be integrated either with the delivered paperless I9 from Gideon Taylor or the delivered I9 functionality within PeopleSoft if you wanted to add eVerify integration to your solution in-house. And then the eVerify integration allows for not only additional information to be entered, but also image documentation to be uploaded as part of the verification process. And then that can come back as either a confirmation or a tentative non-confirmation and actually manage that entire TNC process inside your PeopleSoft environment. The second example that we have is a very robust employee acknowledgement solution that we developed with the state of Tennessee. The state of Tennessee has over 45,000 active employees, and they did a study a couple of years ago that found that each of those employees is required to acknowledge an average of 7 forms, 7 policy documents throughout the course of the year. That equates to almost 350,000 paper documents that needed to be signed, submitted, entered as some sort of acknowledgement into their system, and then filed manually. It was difficult to make sure that they were fully compliant, that all of those documents were accounted for and properly filed and easily accessed in case of an audit. They went in and worked with us to create an eForms-based solution that now automatically tracks all of those acknowledgements online through electronic forms. So periodically throughout the course of the year, when there is new acknowledgement required of an employee, they will receive an email with a link that brings them to a page like this. They can go ahead and click on the document that they need to acknowledge, review that document, and then signify their acknowledgement or acceptance of those terms by clicking a button. That information is automatically saved as part of their employee record, and then it is readily auditable and reportable. They can access that information at any given time, and they can also ensure compliance throughout the organization with the ability to run reports to find out if there are any employees that have not submitted the proper documentation or the required documentation. Finally, before we get to the Minnesota wage theft statement, the University of California, Berkeley created an emergency loan application that provides some very unique compliance capabilities. A student can go online at any given time on any device and click on a link to fill out an emergency loan application. The emergency loan application eForm allows them to select from 3 different emergency loan types. They can go ahead and complete the information that is required as part of the application process. When they click Next, it walks them through acceptance of the terms and conditions of the promissory note, as well as the loan program itself. And all of this, a page like this, is all configured within that form, being able to not only auto-populate with the information from the form itself, but also have rich text formatting to capture all the information about the promissory note and the loan application terms and conditions. And then finally, when they're done, when they've completed and reviewed all that information, they can go ahead and enter their student ID as a form of acceptance, click Submit. The form is then either routed to a financial aid counselor, or more likely, it's going to execute somewhere between 30 and 40 different edits to determine whether or not that student's application can qualify for automatic disbursement of that loan. Over 2/3 of all of the loan applications submitted are handled exclusively by the form itself without any human intervention whatsoever. The form can determine whether or not that student is eligible, whether or not the loan application qualifies, and then determine the disbursement of funds either with a deposit in the student's account or cutting a check for payment to the student. So a tremendously powerful form that has fundamentally changed the kind of work that the financial aid counselors do now that they only have to worry about processing and reviewing 1/3 of the loan applications that they receive. I'm now going to go ahead and hand this over to Teresa Swanson, payroll manager at Hennepin County. Thanks.
So, I'm from Hennepin County, like Scott said. I think probably most people on the call are familiar with it, but we're the largest county in Minnesota. We have about 9,000, a little bit over 9,000 employees. That's our employee base. We started using GTD Forms in 2017, and I think, Scott kind of went over, highlighted the reasons why companies use it, and that certainly they were true for us. We wanted a way to give self-service or other kind of automation to processes that either PeopleSoft doesn't do or they don't do very well. So, we've been trying to get a lot of new things out there to our people so that we can enable them to do things on their own. One of the big appeals, obviously, is, you don't have that cost of customizing PeopleSoft if you put it in GT, and you're able to get through your PUMs and all those other things much quicker because you're not having to reapply customizations. And also, developer time is always a premium, so a huge appeal to us to have our functionals be able to handle, share some of that workload. And it's been nice because as we've developed with the tool, we see GT bringing out more things that put things in the functional side hands and take, have even less of that technical. The technical people are important. Don't get me wrong. I mean, we need them to help us build those CIs and those pieces, but we definitely can get by a little bit more with the functional people working on the forms. Our initial model was we really wanted to do it ourselves. I mean, it's no secret. I work for government. We don't have a lot of discretionary money for things, so it was kind of important to us that we could handle these forms in-house where possible. So our model was we had GT build the first form with us, but with us watching every step of the way and understanding how it was. And we went through a training. There was a week-long training delivered by the lovely Lynette, who's going to demo for you. And then we built the second form with them watching us build it and then guiding us along the way. And then after that, we kind of didn't look back. We just started building forms. Here we have 8 examples here on the slide of things that we have in place right now, several more in the works. We actually have a few more than that's listed here already in production, and we've actually had one that the program already we put it in and it already sunsetted. So, but we've been finding a lot of value with these forms. You can go to the next slide, Scott. All right. So what we're here to talk today about is that Minnesota wage theft law. So in late May, the Minnesota legislature, they passed the Wage Theft Prevention Act, which was a whole bunch of different requirements, but the one that we weren't really prepared for was this written notice piece, that we had to give a written notice to every employee at the start of their employment, and then anytime there was a change to any of the information on the form, if anything changed for that employee, we had to give them a new form. The initial notice also has a requirement that the employee has to acknowledge it. They also have to be able to retain it, so they have to be able to have a copy and be able to access a copy of it if they need it. And then we just show here some of the other things that we had to include on it. We had to have their rates of pay and the basis of those rates, deductions that may be taken from pay, FLSA status and the reason for the classification, time off, and it's actually a very detailed form, and there's a myriad of things on there. But so it was a very, very data-rich form that we had to produce. So we wanted to come up with a sustainable solution for the wage statement. We don't really have a very centralized hiring process or kind of a group that would be able to handle the ongoing maintenance of these forms. So every time people got increases, sending out those new forms. So we knew we wanted to automate it. So we had actually brought GT in to help us with a couple of really complex forms. We were still working on those forms, but we brought them in to work with us because we wanted to learn some more new functionality. So while they were here, we kind of sat down and had a discovery session and, laid out kind of the basic requirements and asked if they thought it could be done in GT, and they said, sure, it could be. So we hired them to build us this wage form. We are not in production yet. We actually were going to be, and we're ready to be, but there was some delay on the HR side with some changes to some job classes that they wanted to do. So we're going to look at rolling out in January. We're going to put it into production, and but we're pretty much done with the testing, and things are looking really great. So with that, we can probably let Lynette show you the form.
All right, you've promised that I'm lovely and exciting, so the pressure's on now. I knew I shouldn't have let you go first. Just a little bit of a summary before we jump in and do the exciting part, the demo. The question of what did we build? Creating all of these forms and getting them out to people in a way that they can acknowledge them and then also have access to them in the system to go and view the historical wage statements that they're stored as part of their employment. Doing that manually was a huge undertaking, and it was taking the idea of it for the people that we've talked to thus far. It just takes a lot of time to create all of those letters. So the first thing that we did is we created a process that's looking at actions and reason codes that we've set up on a table. And when there's an action date with that particular action reason code that's indicating that the individual would require a wage statement, we're loading a row onto a staging table to say this person needs a wage statement. We obviously had to also configure a form that conditionally routes to the employee for acknowledgement. Also on the action reason setup table, there's an indicator of whether they just need to view it or if they actually have to go in and acknowledge that form, and include a PDF of the wage statement itself. And then we created a second process that goes to look at that staging table. It looks to see if an eForm has been created yet, and if one hasn't been created yet, and then there's some other criteria that it looks at before it decides it should create it. Things like the employee has a user profile and they've already logged into the system, which is the minimum requirement for them to be able to then go in and acknowledge the form, and a few other checks, like if they're currently active and various things like that. If it determines that that person, if we're ready to create the form, it will automatically create the form and it will submit it and start it on the routing to the employee for acknowledgement, or just send them a notification for view. And then there's a third process that runs and it checks to see if the employee has acknowledged their forms yet. At 15 days and then every day after 30, we're sending a reminder email out to the employee saying there's a required acknowledgement and you need to go and do this, please. And I had mentioned this before, but just to write in, one of the other big requirements was that ability to view. So we need to send it to the employee the first time, but having a place in the system where they can go in and just view that form historically at any time was another requirement. So I will go ahead and share my screen here. And we will see about getting into the fun part. Hopefully, Scott, are you seeing my screen?
I am.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. I feel the need to warn you of this because it's such a complex process. The manual way of doing this was such a burden to the resources that would have to go in and do this daily and try to send things out and track it. When I show you the form and the experience that the employee sees, it's very quick, it's very painless, and if you blink, you might miss it. But we're going to go ahead and start with what it looks like for an employee as a new hire, what they see in the system and how they receive their wage statement. So the first thing that we'll see is they receive an email saying, welcome to the organization, and here's a link to get into the form. Once they click the link, it will log them into PeopleSoft. For this particular person in the video, I was already logged into PeopleSoft, so it took me directly into the page itself where my wage statement is contained. If I hadn't been logged into the PeopleSoft system, I would have just seen the authentication screen, whether it's a single sign-on screen or the delivered PeopleSoft login screen, so that I can authenticate and the system knows that I am who I say I am to meet those electronic signature requirements. There's some basic information. We're showing the employee's name and then some just text that says you're receiving this because of this Minnesota statute, and here's some people you can contact if you have questions. There's a button that they can click on to open up the wage statement. It is in the PDF document. And when that opens, we're triggering code using PeopleSoft's BI Publisher feature to generate the PDF and dynamically insert the data into the form. The data that's getting inserted into this PDF is actually part of the GT form that we created and configured, and it's just passing the information straight through to that PeopleSoft BI Publisher report. They can view all of the information inside of this, and then once they're done, they can download the PDF copy if they want, and then close that separate window that it opened in and go ahead and acknowledge that they received it. You'll see that acknowledgement statement here. If the individual doesn't check that acknowledgement saying, I did receive this and I've actually looked at it, they can't push the acknowledge button. They'll receive an error message. So once I push check and I select acknowledge, then I'll just receive confirmation that I successfully submitted the form. One of the benefits here, and we'll see the log for this form a little bit later in the demo, but it's logged that I signed the form. It's logged that I've checked that action item as well to indicate that I did indeed read it, and that's stored within the system. So I warned you, it's very quick for the employee and very painless. So just to run through that a second time, just a little bit different. We're going to take a look as an employee because there's actually 3 times we're generating these. The first I'm not showing here, and that's right when this goes live, every single employee needs to receive a wage statement. So we're loading those on the table, and they have a separate email that gets generated and sent to them about, hey, you're an employee, but this is your first wage statement. We generate it for new hires as well. And then anytime something changes on job data, then we have to generate an email. So they receive an email with a little bit different content in it. We don't want to welcome them to the organization. They're already there. You can either click on the link in the email, similar to the one we saw before, or alternatively, you can embed the link into a tile. So I'm in a testing system with demo data to protect any confidential information. For Hennepin County, they integrated this into one of their payroll tiles so they could access it through what they're already doing on their portal. But you can integrate it into an existing tile or have your own tile here. And this is also how the employee would come to view any historical statements. So they can acknowledge statements or they can view any of their forms that exist. It's a very similar look and feel. They can always go back and view that wage statement that was automatically generated and attached to the form. And they could see when they acknowledged it, if it did require an acknowledgement if they wanted to. So now we'll just take a little bit of a look at what we did to configure this form and make it work within the system. It was a very complex process to build and develop to, but as you can see in the end, it's actually a pretty simple solution. And from the employee's perspective, it's very painless for them to go in and just acknowledge the statement. So this screen here is our setup for the forms. This is where we go in and create the form, and then all the information about how that form behaves is contained on this page. The first general tab just has information about what's this form, what form family does it belong to, do we allow attachments and things like that. The Pages tab is where we get into the details of how many pages are on the form. This form really doesn't have that much information on it, so it's a single page form. If we had a more complex form, you'll often see multiple pages here. And then when we go into the form setup, you'll see we have 3 segments with fields on the form. The header has the EMPL ID and the EMPL record, which we saw at the top of the form when the employee opened it. I will show you in a minute how we configured that so it populates with the employee ID and the name and everything in there. But I'm going to just show you how we did all those fields at once in a slightly different view. We have a hidden segment here. This one we didn't see on the form. It just contains values that are all hidden but maintained for that BI publisher report. Each one of these fields either helps us determine conditional logic on the BI publisher report, so we know which sections to show or which ones to hide when we generate the report, or it's the actual value that gets inserted into the form. And then the last segment was just that button that said open the wage statement. There's segment instructions, page level instructions, and things like that. But that button's the one that we push. And then the next tab determines our workflow routing. For this workflow routing, it was a basic one-step workflow. You can see over here it has this little blue button. We call those visual ifs. I'm going to click into one of those on the next screen over here, but that's what we use to make it conditionally either route to that employee to require an acknowledgement, or not route to the employee, just have it as a view-only access type of thing. Our next tab is the notifications that are set up for this particular form. I did mention a number of notifications that Hennepin County has implemented. This is our demo database, so I'm going to show you a few of these here and then talk to a few more that they have in their system. But we have these 2, the wage statement routed and the wage statement attached. These are email notifications that we configured. We have dynamic information embedded into those emails, things like the person's name, a direct link to get into the form. The attachment email notification, Hennepin is sending that to their personal email address for hires and rehires as soon as it's entered into the system. So it might be 2 weeks out, someone's getting hired. They're pulling in that personal email from their applicant tracking system and sending them a welcome email with the wage statement attached to it, as well as a notification that says when you arrive your first day, you'll have another email and you need to acknowledge this. So the routed email is the one that says it will generate and it will send to the official Hennepin County email. So the first time the employee logs in, it will be waiting for them in the inbox with that link that says, hey, you're here now. Please go and acknowledge and log into the system. We do send a notification to the manager of that employee, particularly for hires and rehires. It's a way for them to just confirm mostly that the hire has been entered into the system and that the employee is ready to start. And then in those cases where the employee, it's not routed, they don't have to go and acknowledge it. They just get a link to view the form. The other email template that we have is that reminder email template that gets sent just to remind the employee at 15 days, 30 days, and every day after that, you need to go in and do your job. You need to click this button or we will continually ping you with emails trying to get you to finish it up. I'll click into one of these visual ifs here just so you can see what it looks like. The visual if is something that we use throughout our framework. It's a way of creating a true-false statement. You can create that in multiple layers with various logic throughout the form. This one's a very basic visual if, but you can use it to say, show this field, hide this field, show this section, hide the section, show this page, hide the page. So all throughout the setup, whether it's workflow, page setup, even the email notifications, and requiring attachments and things like that. So this is just saying if we indicated that the action reason that generated this particular form, if in our setup table we said that it required an acknowledgement, then that flag would be set to yes. So in this case, we're saying if it's not equal to yes, require acknowledgement, then send this email because it's the view only version. The action items is where we set up that thing that we had to toggle over to yes before the individual could push acknowledge. And I'm going to skip over to the report setup tab. This is the place where we're linking in the BI publisher report. Our forms already have XML and it generates and will feed into that BI publisher report. So we just have to go and set up the report and create the template. And then the forms will push that XML in and it will create it for you. So this is where we're indicating, and I'll go in and look at the PeopleSoft setup for this as well, but that's how we tie the two together with configuration. And then on the data tab, just swinging back to this, we use something called the data pool. And I promised that I would show you how we populated the form with data using configuration. So we have a number of fields, and we knew that we needed values in those fields. So using the data pool, I can come in here and I can add the record that contains the data I need. And then I can join the keys into my form itself. So it identifies the correct row from that record and places it in the field based on the setup. So this is where I'm saying for the personal data record, go in and look at, this is my actual form, the record of my form and the field on my form. Pick this value from my form and join that to the EMPL ID on personal data. And once I do that, I can then select any field on personal data to drop into the fields on my form itself. Same with this, the view for the wage statement that we have that contains some other information that we're joining in. So when I click over to the second tab of this data pool, there's a few ways you can access this information, but I like this view because it shows all of the fields that are actually on our form in one single view. And then over here in this third column, it's saying initialize from the data pool. Initialize means when the form opens, it should have this value in this field. So we're saying things like from the wage statement view, pull the EMPL record and put it into the EMPL record field on our form. Or pull the company for this person and actually store it into the company on the form. So it's just mapping our form field into the database. We do have one example here of a cool feature where as requirements get a little more complex, you can have your developers create little code snippets and then you can still drop those in throughout the configuration as you need. We call them smart sources. And they're just a dynamic input of data. So for this particular smart source, we knew that we needed the check date because we need to insert that into our BI publisher report. In order to get the check date, we needed to go and look at the action date that row happened for the action and the reason. And then we needed to go and look at, for their pay group, what's the next paycheck date on that pay calendar. And we needed to input that in there because that would be the next time payroll would pick up the change and potentially impact this individual's wages. So that's just a people code smart source that goes out and runs through all of that logic and returns the check date to us so that we can input it onto the form here. So we'll navigate here and look at a little bit more setup. I'm going into the PeopleSoft delivered screens here under reporting tools and the BI publisher tool and report definition. I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with BI publisher reports inside of PeopleSoft. I have a love-hate relationship with them. They're so cool and you can do so many cool things with them. And also they're very basic in a way that can be frustrating. But from a functional perspective, I find them to be very powerful because I can accomplish a lot without having to pull a developer in. Particularly once I get all my fields on the form already generated, my XML coming from the GTD form is already formatted. I can extract a sample of that code really easily. So I'm going to click on this RTF template. If you're not familiar with it, there's a download inside of PeopleSoft. I'm going to pause this video because my video is a little flickery. And I'm just going to pull this Word document over here instead so you can see it. There's a plugin inside of Microsoft Documents. You can use it in Word or Excel and some other various applications you can use this plugin in. You upload your XML structure and then you can just drop fields into there and insert them in Word. Which is really cool. And again, for me as a functional person, I love it because I don't have to have a developer go in and code all of this. So this is where you can see any of these gray fields are our logic coming from that BI Publisher report. And it's just saying, take this value from the form and drop it in here into this particular report. We also have the ability to do conditional segments. So here you can see inside of the template itself, we have two different sections for section 2. But the employee, when they receive one, they only see one or the other. And what we're doing is we've tied in some conditional logic around the value of the company field for that employee. And depending on their company, they'll either see the legal name of the employer as Hennepin County or the Minnesota Ballpark Authority. So you can see quite a bit of conditional logic, whether they're exempt or non-exempt based on the FLSA status. And then we're inserting their hourly rate, the text, and then based on their benefit plan, then we're determining which leave verbiage to put in. Again, they only ever get the ones that are valid for them, and the conditional logic will hide the rest. There's some links and other information pulling in. But that's how you set up the BI Publisher report and then link it in. And then it will pull into our form. So I'm going to fast forward this. Sorry if I make you a little dizzy. My recording of the Word document was just a little flickery. So, okay. So now the big question I always have is, well, how does this process work? The form was really basic. It was really quick to acknowledge it and to show what the employee sees. But what did we have to build behind the scenes? So the first thing that we're going to take a look at is a setup table that we built. It's a custom setup table. It's fairly basic. And we just indicate in here the action and the reason combination to say that when we run our job, if we've entered this action and reason combination row for anyone today, create a wage statement. And when that wage statement is created, then this is the indicator to say if the person has to acknowledge it or not. And then once we have that setup table done, we have two processes that actually get run here. I'll add a new run control just so you can see what that process looks like. The idea at Hennepin County is they're running this process each evening, which means that it will run and it will say, okay, everyone that had a job data row for today, add them to the staging table is the first step, and then the second step is to say create the form. So here I can run it for the whole population and say everyone that had an action date of December 10th, run both the processes where you load the table and you create the wage statement. And then that is in the process monitor, so you can go and see when it's completed. And you can also see if there were any errors, if there was someone we thought we should have created the form for, but it didn't succeed. And then the second option that you can do is sometimes you'll have just a single employee where you know you need to generate a wage statement for them, but they might not follow the action reason logic. So there is also this option where you can run for a one-off employee and indicate the same information to load them onto the staging table. the process that generates the reminder emails is tied into that second process that runs to actually create the wage statement. And inside of query here, I'm just going to pull up that staging table that I mentioned that we're loading in, just so you can see the information that's available through that table. So we do load the actual employee to say, hey, they need a wage statement. And then once the wage statement is created, we load in the form ID. So you can always map it back to say, here's the employee ID, this was the action date, the effective date, this was the action reason that required it. Yes, they had to acknowledge it. Here's the user we sent it to. This is the date that we created it and the form ID. So you can see there's 2 employees here without the form ID information, which means the next time we run our process load, it will look at those employees, and if they meet the criteria, it will at that point create a wage statement for them. These 2 employees has not created the wage statement yet because they don't have a user profile, which means that we wouldn't be able to route it to them and they wouldn't be able to log in and see it. And then the next thing we'll look at here is just a tool to help manage the forms and see what each particular form, if you need to dig into a form and do some debugging. It's called the admin tool. You can see I searched for a very specific form. Excuse me, I have to cough. I have that wintertime plague that's been going around. So I searched for one very specific form. This is the one that we sent to the new hire. And I can see everything that was done on that form on this page and even take action if I need to. So for this, it's showing that it did route for approvals and that I came in and approved that form. The form log is where I can see all of the details, the date and time it was created, the date and time stamp of who accepted it, what that user ID is. The work list items is blank currently because it's not routed to anyone. And then the form data tab, this is more of like a technical debugging, but within here you can get a glance and see what the XML looked like that fed through to the BI publisher report and see all the form data as well. Action items was that box they had to check to acknowledge. You can see it has my user ID in here, my empl ID, and the date and time that I clicked that. So if an employee says, well, I never checked that box, you can say, well, here's the date and time that you did it on this particular form. And then lastly, there's the notification log. Anytime we send out an email to an employee, that email shows up here with the date and time stamp of when it was sent. So if you're trying to say, oh, well, we didn't ever get that email, you can come in and you can look to see, well, what email address did it go to? Or what was the content of the email if someone's calling to say, well, I got this email, but I don't really know what it means. Then you can access that information through here as well. And Scott, I believe that is the end of my demo. Did we have any questions come in, or is there anything else that you would like me to talk through?
No, I thought that was great and very thorough. Thank you. And again, if anybody has any questions, feel free to submit those or raise your hand. We're more than happy to field those. Thank you, Lynette. I'll go ahead and take that back. So just as a quick wrap up in terms of the stuff that Lynette just walked us through, why look at using a tool like GTD Forms for custom compliance solutions in PeopleSoft? I mentioned earlier that it is Oracle validated. It is all people tools built. So there's nothing foreign within GTD Forms that you would be introducing into your PeopleSoft environment that already isn't there. It is predominantly configuration based for both form creation and form management with setup tables to control the data elements, the business logic, form actions, and routing. A lot of that you saw in Lynette's demonstration, showing the setup tables, showing what went into creating the behavior that you saw in the wage theft statement eForm. You've got native real-time access to PeopleSoft data. Lynette demonstrated how those data pools are created to allow you to map the fields in your form that you created to where that data resides inside PeopleSoft and have that information then pre-populate and default into your form. Configuration-based conditional routing and email notifications to make sure that it's going to the right people at the right time and that the appropriate notifications are going out, letting folks know what the status is. Being able to enable mass actions and batch processes. So these forms go out to all eligible employees anytime there is a qualifying event that triggers that form action. Being able to conveniently format and print BI publisher reports and allow for users to capture those as PDFs and save those off or print those if they need to. The fact that it is fluid, there will probably be plenty of examples of employees that access this through a device other than their desktop computer. And then finally, just being able to have the flexibility to design forms and form processes to satisfy really any business process requirement you can think of. I'm going to go ahead and send out a link to the video for this particular webinar. And you're welcome to go through these, go through the additional information. I'll also provide a link to the PowerPoint that you can download and access. You can click through any of these links to see additional demonstrations of eForms in action. There's a QR code that allows you to actually do your own demo and walk through an eForm live, filling that out and experiencing that dynamic conditional behavior as you go along. As just a quick reminder, we do have some upcoming webinars in January and February. Feel free to join us for those. I'll include registration buttons or links in the email that I send out to everyone, so that'll make it easy and convenient for you. And then at the end of this PowerPoint that you can download, it also does have some customer success stories in terms of what other organizations are doing with GTD Forms. And I think that's it for our agenda. Does anybody have any questions before we leave? If not, we thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. We look forward to hopefully having you join us for future webinars. Have a great afternoon and a wonderful holiday season. Thank you very much.